What if the biggest threat technology poses to the church isn't what it allows us to do, but what it slowly trains us to become? What if the issue is not machines becoming human, but humans becoming heartless, soulless machines? Most Christians ask whether technology is useful. Far fewer ask what technology is doing to them. And that may be the more important question, actually. Welcome back. So far, we've asked 3 questions. Can something sound like worship without actually being worship? Why were human beings created to create? Does God determine how he is worshipped? Today, we ask a different question. A question that sits underneath all the other questions. What does technology do to the people who use it? Notice the question carefully. Not what can technology do, but what does technology do to us? Because every tool changes the person holding it, using it. A hammer changes how we approach a piece of wood. A camera changes how you experience a moment. A smartphone changes how you experience time. And if that is true, what happens when AI becomes part of worship? To answer that question, we need help from 2 unlikely guys, a philosopher and a cultural critique. Neither of them was writing about worship or even worship music, yet both saw something that the church desperately needs to understand. In 1954, a philosopher named Martin Heidegger published an essay called The Question Concerning Technology, and his central claim was shocking. Technology is not merely a collection of tools. Technology is a way of seeing. Most people think technology is neutral. A hammer is just a hammer. A computer is just a computer. An AI tool is just a tool. Heidegger disagreed. He argued that every technology teaches us to see reality in a particular way. And he gave that way of seeing a name: Enframing. The word sounds complicated. The idea is simple. Technology trains us to view the world primarily as a collection of resources, things to be managed, optimized, measured, used. A forest becomes timber, lumber. A river becomes hydroelectric power. Land becomes real estate. Time becomes productivity. Time is money, we say. Everything becomes a resource. Everything becomes useful, something to be optimized. The discovery of the steam engine in Europe was amazing, no doubt. But it also quickly reinforced and changed the way Europe interacted with the rest of the world. For example, the East African Railway became a massive optimization machine, exploiting inland East African resources, gold, copper, ivory, faster and more efficiently. And here is the most unsettling question, my friends. What happens when that way of seeing enters the church? This is where Heidegger becomes surprisingly relevant, because technological thinking rarely arrives wearing a name tag. It doesn't announce itself. It quietly reshapes assumptions. Attendance becomes a metric. People become demographics, statistics. Disciples become consumers. Worship becomes content generation. The sermon becomes a product. The church becomes a platform. None of these things happen overnight, and none of them necessarily begin with bad intentions either. In fact, they often begin with good intentions. The desire to reach more people, to communicate more clearly, the desire to remove unnecessary barriers. Those can all be good things. But eventually, slowly, subtly, the shift occurs. The dominant question changes. Instead of asking, is this faithful? We begin asking only, is this effective? That brings us to the second thinker, because no one diagnosed that shift more clearly. In 1992, cultural critic Neil Postman published a book called Technopoly. By the way, you can find all these resources online. Its subtitle was chilling: The Surrender of Culture to Technology. Postman's argument was straightforward. Technology begins as a servant, but if left unquestioned, it slowly becomes a master. A culture enters Technopoly when technology stops serving its values and starts defining them instead. And the dominant question becomes, does it work? Not, is it true? Is it good? Is it wise? Simply, does it work? And if it works, all right, let's go. Think about how often that question dominates church conversation. Does it grow attendance? Does it increase engagement? Does it improve efficiency? Does it scale? Efficiency becomes the highest goal, the highest virtue. Production becomes the measure of excellence. Output becomes success. And before too long, activities that cannot be measured begin disappearing. Prayer disappears, meditation vanishes, silence and waiting and contemplation all disappear. Because you see, the very practices that form deep disciples often appear inefficient. In a technological culture, inefficiency feels like failure. That is why this conversation matters greatly, because the church rarely abandons its theology overnight. More often, it slowly adopts assumptions from the culture around it, and those assumptions eventually reshape how theology is practiced. Now, at this point, Christians make a mistake. They hear these critiques and conclude, oh, technology is the enemy. But scripture won't allow us to say that. God created human beings to cultivate the world, to build, develop, to create tools, exercise wise dominion. Technology is part of that cultural mandate. It's part of the Imago Dei, part of what image bearers do. This is where John Dyer's work is helpful. The problem isn't that technology exists. The problem is that every technology carries assumption, reshapes habits, reforms desires, nudges us towards a particular vision of reality. And that means Christians must ask more than, can we just use this? We must ask, what is it doing to us? What kind of people is this tool shaping us, fashioning us, forming? What kind of husbands, fathers, wives, mothers, children, families, friends, students, teachers, neighbors are we becoming? What vision of worship does this technology encourage? And what vision does it discourage? Romans 12:2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Paul's command is remarkably relevant. He does not tell Christians to retreat from the world, nor does he tell them to adopt everything the world creates. He tells them something harder: discern, evaluate, test, think, recognize what is shaping you, and refuse to be molded by anything that competes with God's truth. That means the church's responsibility is neither naive rejection nor blind adoption. It is discernment. Careful, biblical, spirit-shaped, spirit-empowered discernment. And that brings us back to AI. The first question is not, can AI generate worship music? We already know the answer. It can. The deeper question is, what understanding of worship does AI encourage? What habits does it cultivate? What assumptions does it reinforce? What does it train us to value? Because if worship slowly becomes another form of optimized content production, then the church may lose something essential without realizing it. But there's still one piece of this puzzle missing, perhaps the most important piece. Because worship music is not merely expressing beliefs, it is shaping beliefs. Week after week, month after month, year after year, the songs we sing are doing something to us, forming and fashioning us, teaching and transforming us, directing and discipling us. What worship music actually does inside the human soul is far more powerful than most Christians realize. That is where we're going in the next episode. And once you see it, you will never listen to congregational singing the same way again. If this episode has challenged you in any way, like, subscribe, share it with someone who cares deeply about the future of the church. Until next time, remember, the most important question about technology is not what it allows us to do. The most important question is what it is teaching us to become. See ya in the next one.